Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came.
If you're like the millions upon millions of television viewers who in the 1980s fell in love with a weekly sitcom that told the story of a somewhat motley crew of absolutely delightful people who met week after week in a Boston saloon named Cheers, then this theme fills you with wonderful memories and perhaps brings a tear to your eye. I'm Mark Golub, and one of the most brilliant, creative, and influential sitcoms to ever run on American television was the multi-Emmy Award-winning series Cheers, co-created and almost always directed by a genius, recognized as TV's most accomplished and significant comedy director, James Burrows, who also was a major force in such other groundbreaking American television treasures as Taxi, Will and Grace, Frasier, and Friends, in addition to many, many more huge comedy hits. Simply put, Jim Burrows is the Michelangelo of his profession, a brilliant, innovative, creative directing talent with a unique style all his own. And just so you have a feel for James Burrows' stature in his field, he was nominated for an Emmy Award every single year but one between 1980 and 2005. That's nominations for the top award in his craft for 25 years, and 10 times Jim Burrows took the Emmy home. He's also been nominated for 15 Directors Guild of America awards and won 4 of those. During Cheers' 11-year run, Jim Burrows directed almost every episode, and he did direct every episode of Will and Grace during its 8-year run, a series that not only won 16 Emmy Awards, but which literally revolutionized American attitudes about gays and paved the path of tolerance and acceptance in our country. He helped shape the iconic series Friends and was instrumental in creating the dynamic between the 6 singles who became an intimate part of our lives for 11 seasons. And perhaps most important of all, Jim Burrows is universally regarded by his community as one of the most lovely and caring human beings in the business, and one who's been a mentor and a friend to those both in front of and behind the camera. And in February of 2016, NBC brought many of his iconic cast members back together to celebrate a milestone in Jim Burrows' fabulous career, his having directed his 1,000th television episode. And lucky, lucky me, and lucky, lucky us, it's my enormous privilege and honor to welcome to JBS a Jewish kid from music and art who went on to become the best in his profession, director Jim Burrows. And Jim, as I said to you, I'm a huge fan of yours, a huge fan of Taxi and Cheers and Will and Grace, and so much of what you have crafted. And it's an enormous honor and kick for me to meet you on our JBS phones. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I didn't know how good I was until I heard that introduction.
You're better still. By the way, so first, congratulations and mazel tov on having directed your 1,000th episode and for your amazing body of work that so enriched the lives of all of us who've been touched by the genius of your work. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So, Jim, did you ever take a moment to think of the impact you and your work have had on American life, how your sitcoms, especially Taxi, Cheers, Friends, Will and Grace, each in their own way, has literally changed how Americans think of one another and how we treat one another?
Well, I never attempted to do any kind of proselytizing in my shows. I mean, that was Norman Lear's wheelhouse, and he did it so brilliantly. I never started out doing that. I just started out trying to make people laugh. I think probably the only show that had any kind of proselytizing effect was Will and Grace, which we always set out to be funny, but it took a turn and became an important advocate for the acceptance of gays in America. You know, we knew there's a certain portion of the country that wouldn't want to watch it initially because it was about gays, so we had to somehow sneak them in and get them to watch to see how funny it was, and once they saw how funny it was, it became a big hit.
Absolutely. Jim, before we talk more specifics about your own work, may I take a moment to talk about your father, Abe Burrows, who, again, he was also a real favorite of mine as I grew up in New York. I'm virtually your age. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and I loved the Broadway musical. And your father, Abe Burrows, was a person of enormous stature and talent to me. I loved watching him on What's My Line. I became aware that he was the preeminent Broadway show doctor, continually being called in to fix a show that seemed to be floundering in previews, turning shows into mega hits. There was Guys and Dolls. And one of my most treasured memories was sitting in a Broadway theater in 1961, seeing your father's musical, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, being mesmerized by Robert Morris and Rudy Valley. And of course, your father won a Pulitzer with Frank Lesser for How to Succeed. Can you take one moment to talk about the relationship you had with your father and the influence he may have had upon you?
Well, you know, my father was a legend in New York City.
Yes.
He was a Broadway legend. And my mother and father were divorced when I was 5 years old. So when we would see my father, we saw him at least once a week. Sometimes during the day, he would trundle me down to a rehearsal or to a performance, and I would sit in the back and not pay much attention to it. But through all those years of him doing that, obviously osmosis had its effect. And then once I got out of Yale School of Drama, I had to go to work, so I got a job stage managing for my father. And my ears were then opened again to watching how he worked with people and watching how he treated people and how funny he was. So I never really wanted to be in that business, but it just by being around him, and I had nowhere else. I had no other. I was a government major at Oberlin College, and the only reason I was a government major was the only way I could get out. It was the easiest major. You needed the least amount of credits. But I fought against the theater because he was, I didn't think I could be as successful as him. And then when I got into it, I found that I had learned so much from him, and he had passed the gene on to me to be funny. So, that's what he meant to me.
I know he lived to be 74. Did he live to see your real success? He
saw the first couple of years of Cheers. He was not, he was not in the best mental shape. But,
yes.
He had a few interesting things to say to me about it. But, he had come out in the 70s and had seen me do one or two shows when I was working at MTN.
So your father's given name was Abram Borowitz. Obviously, he was a New York Jew in the theatrical world. Did Jewishness and Jewish identity ever mean anything to you, either growing up or later in life?
No.
Very honest.
My mother and father did the one thing you don't do with a Jewish boy, and they said to me, "Do you want a bar mitzvah?" You never do that.
Yes.
And both my sisters and I said no. So we had no formal Jewish upbringing whatsoever. I didn't go to shul. The only time I went to shul was for bar mitzvahs of friends. So nothing like that. And then when I got married for the first time, I married a lady who was conservative. So I would occasionally get on what I called the shul bus and go for Yom Kippur
Yes.
and Rosh Hashanah. And then we had 3 children, and she felt strongly about educating them in Hebrew school, so we sent them to Hebrew school out here. And I supported the temple we belonged to, the conservative. I also supported an Orthodox shul out here.
Why'd you do that?
Because I was becoming successful, and I thought, I guess the Jews can use more money. So I did it because I was a once-a-year Jew. I would go on Yom Kippur, and that was it. So,
yeah.
Just before Nila, the head of the shul said, "Would you like to be bar mitzvahed?" Because they knew I had. I said, "Sure." So I didn't know what I was getting into, but
yes.
I learned. I don't read Hebrew. I learned the prayers phonetically. I did what I could. I basically did it so my wife could buy a hat.
Uh-huh.
I was bar mitzvahed in an Orthodox shul with the women behind curtains. And the upshot of that was that for my 50th birthday, the Charles brothers, who created Cheers with me, said that I was the only man they knew that was bar mitzvahed at 47 and lost his hair at 13.
By the way, I understand there was no Jewish observance in your life, either as a child or for much of your adult life, despite the fact that your first wife was sort of pulling you into it. That's different than talking about one's sense of identity. If somebody were to say to you, Jim Burrows, you a Jew, how would you answer it?
Yes.
Okay. Does that mean anything to you? And by the way, did your Jewishness, whatever you mean by the answer yes, do you think in any way the Jewish heritage or the Jewish cultural experience you may have picked up here, there, and everywhere, did it at all influence, you think, either who you are as a person or who you are in terms of your sense of comedy and humor?
Well, I think it influenced who I am as a person. I'm proud to be a Jew. I grew up in New York City where it was okay to be a Jew.
Yes.
I mean, I didn't grow up in Europe where someplace it was not okay. So, I feel empowered by that. I'm proud to be a Jew. I think a lot of the humor comes from that, and I know my father was proud to be a Jew. My father was bar mitzvahed, and he was proud to be a Jew too.
Lovely. Okay, coming out to your first two iconic television sitcoms. They were Taxi and they were Cheers. And Jim, I want to share with you my take on them, and then you tell me if you think I'm on target or not. My own sense is that first Taxi, and you directed many episodes of Taxi, and then Cheers, which you co-created with the Charles brothers, combined smart comic theater with a sweetness that was in some way groundbreaking in its time. Before Taxi and Cheers, sitcoms tended to just be silly humor. They didn't try to build on the real complexity and subtlety of human relationships. And then here comes Taxi, starring Judd Hirsch and a fabulous cast. And you were really very lucky to have such a great cast. But what the character of Alex Riga does is basically play almost a lead character in a weekly morality play that always had a message, and that by the time the show was over, there was a tear in your eye, and you felt good, and you wanted to jump through the screen. They were much smaller at the time, television sets, but you wanted to jump through the screen, you wanted to hug these guys. Now, am I describing something you feel accurate, or quite honestly, Jim, do you feel I'm projecting?
Oh, I think you're projecting. If you start with even I Love Lucy or Dick Van Dyke, they told wonderful stories with amiable characters and, real-life situations. And then you had All in the Family, which was, incredibly groundbreaking. But then you had a center there that was a bigot, but you loved watching that bigot, and he was mitigated by Rob Reiner. So all comedy has to, you just can't be angry in it. You just have to have some kind. you can get angry, but there has to be a resolution at the end, and somebody learns something at the end. So I think there were many, and then you have the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was incredibly sweet and charming, and all these sitcoms, if they tell good stories, are all morality plays.
Yes.
They're all morality plays. I think that the thing between Taxi and Cheers, I think the real big difference between Taxi and Cheers is that Taxi was a place, the Taxi Garage was a place that the people wanted to get out of. They always had dreams of getting out of it.
Yes.
And Cheers was a place where everybody wanted to come to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the real big difference between those two shows. But in order to keep an audience, you got to tell a story, and you got to have a moral, and you got to have sweetness somewhere in it. Even Louis De Palma, in all his craziness and meanness, well, you forgave him because I think you felt a little sorry for him because he was so short. Same thing with Rhea Perlman in Cheers.
Yes.
She was an assassin with her mouth, but you felt sorry for her because she was, left with 4 children by her husband.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all, to me, things that make all those characters vulnerable and make people want to watch comedies.
Okay, I want you to let me push you just a moment. I'm not suggesting there weren't stories told in all the sitcoms that you just described. And by the way, I grew up with Mary Tyler Moore as well, and I felt that show was just delightful, and Lou Grant was wonderful, and it spawned a number of spin-offs. So it was a very powerful show, and our audience should know that's where you began your directing experience and your career, and you went to work for the MTM Entertainment Company, and you directed Mary Tyler Moore, you directed Bob Newhart. I'm not saying that there weren't stories being told. When I think, however, of the difference of the level of character development, and I contrast it with, and again, I'm going back in my years to Ozzie and Harriet, or to I Love Lucy. But when those shows ended, rarely was there a tear in your eye. And when you watched Taxi, there was almost never an ending without a tear in your eye. Now, am I telling you something new to you? Are you surprised to hear me say, at the end of Taxi, there was an emotional reaction which never, I shouldn't say never, almost, it was not a ever-present experience when you watched I Love Lucy, when in its time it was the preeminent sitcom on American television. And even Mary Tyler Moore, while every now and then there was a tear in your eye, it was a different crafting of relationships and stories. And I want to know whether, when I say to you, so often, almost every single episode of Taxi makes you feel good in a very powerful way, in a way that Dick Van Dyke didn't do it, and Mary Tyler Moore didn't do it, and certainly I Love Lucy didn't do it. Am I saying something that is new to you?
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. I understand that on Taxi, the characters were different than you've ever seen on television before. Because no show had a Reverend Jim, and no show had a Louis De Palma. But I never, for me it was the humor, not necessarily the morality of the piece that made it people watch it and tune in. So you're saying something to me that I guess I'm flattered by.
I hope you are. I mean it in the most flattering way. And it'll be interesting to see whether people who hear our discussion tell either you or me that what I'm describing is something they experienced as well. But anyway, I wanted you to hear it from me because I do mean it as an enormous compliment to you. And I believe as I watch the the series that you are most notably associated with. Taxi, Cheers, Friends, and Will and Grace. And by the way, there are many, many, many more. If people go online, the number of sitcoms that you not simply directed, but you had influence on is amazing. And again, you just celebrated your 1,000th directing episode. But so much of what you did had, and maybe it was just instinctive with you, and maybe it was not on a conscious level, Jim, but you should take enormous pride in how you elevated the human soul at the same time that you did what you were setting out to do. You made us laugh all the time. And Taxi and Cheers, you just, week after week, not every show does it week after week, you made us laugh. So I want you to hear that. And again, we'll see if other people ever say this to you now that I've said it to you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Your series had fabulous casts. It's just amazing to me to think of the talent that came through your various sitcoms. And I remind people, on Taxi you had Judd Hirsch and Danny DeVito and the late Andy Kaufman and Christopher Lloyd. On Cheers you had Ted Danson and Shelley Long and Rhea Perlman and Woody Harrelson and Kelsey Grammer and Bebe Neuwirth and Kirstie Alley. On Will and Grace you had Deborah Messing and Eric McCormick. And every cast member on Friends, Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, David Schwimmer, Matt LeBlanc, Lisa Kudrow, Matthew Perry, they all went on to have amazing careers after Friends. And Mike and Molly had Melissa McCarthy. So I'm wondering, you were involved in casting. I understand you're right now in California casting on your next sitcom. Can you discuss at all the extent to which the casting was so critical in the success you have, and whether, again, you also ever say to yourself, it's amazing whom you worked with who then went on to have extraordinary careers beyond the sitcom that you created?
Well, casting, there's a lot of luck involved in everything.
Yes.
And, especially casting. And I always say that when I did the Friends pilot in 1994, it was the last pilot I did that year. I think I did 4 others. And it was a last-minute pilot, and those 6 people were available. So they had not been picked up for any other pilot, so they were available to that pilot. So you can see how much luck is involved.
Yes, yes.
I mean, when we were casting Cheers, Shelley Long, we kind of knew about her, the Charles brothers and I, and she had refused to do a lot of pilots and everything like that. And we were lucky enough to get her for our pilot. Ted Danson is another guy who had done a couple of things. So, I mean, there's a lot of luck involved. And once once you have a great script and you cast it, then you got to be on the right network where they put you where people can see you.
Yes.
And the audience has to find you. So there's a lot of luck involved, and I've been fortunate, really fortunate, to find the right people at the right time. There's no better example than, when Shelley left, we were lucky enough to have Kirstie Alley pop up.
Yes.
And we cast, when Coach died, we were lucky enough to find Woody.
How did that happen?
Well, Nikki passed away I think at the end of the 3rd year.
Right.
And we were then, at that point, Cosby was on the air. And Cosby was followed by Family Ties, which had Michael Fox. And Michael J. Fox was a huge, huge star. So we decided, when Coach passed away, to go younger, to try to get some of the young viewers from Family Ties.
Mm-hmm.
And we were lucky enough to find Woody Harrelson. He just came in to read, walked in the room, blew his nose, and blew us all away. So, and then then we had Bebe Neuwirth all of a sudden. Then we had Kelsey coming in the 3rd year. So we were lucky to find the right people at the right time.
Yes.
I wish I could take credit. We picked them. But the casting director had a lot to do with it. The fact that they weren't working had a lot to do with it. The writing had a lot to do with it. So there's a lot of luck and a lot of skill involved in it.
Yes. Bowie, a number of your sitcoms end up having major Jewish characters. In Friends, Rachel, Monica, Ross, all Jewish. I think Deborah Messing's character, Grace Adler, is Jewish. And again, I say to you, my most personal connection was to Judd Hirsch's character, Alex Riga. So I wonder if there was in any way, as you say, you went out of your way to pick somebody young to replace Coach. Was there any conscious intent to have identifiably Jewish characters on your sitcom?
Let's see. Definitely Grace Adler was always. Max and David wrote a neurotic Jew. I know that's a redundancy, but they wrote that character. That's who that was. Ross and Rachel, you had Marta and David, who are both Jewish, and they probably wrote Ross and Rachel and Monica to be Jewish, but I don't think they talked much. I don't know. I haven't seen all of them, but I'm not sure they talked too much about that. I know Elliot Gould was their father, so there you go. And then Christine Pickles was their mother, so there you have one Jew and one not a Jew. And I don't make any conscious effort to do that. I don't think anybody does. I mean, it's just Judd brings that to the dance.
Yes.
We never discussed whether Alex was Jewish or not.
Although he clearly is, yes?
I have no idea.
You have no idea.
It's up to interpretation.
All
I know
right.
Judd is.
Yes, I know.
If you see most of my shows, and you mentioned most of them, they all seem like they're a family.
Yes.
Each individual is a family, and if you saw the special, you would see that they all love one another. And
yes.
It's one of my, when I start a show or when I work on a show, you have to check your ego at the door.
Mm-hmm.
There is no counting lines. There's no upstaging, anything like that. Everybody can say anything they want about anybody else. We're all in this to make the show better and as funny as possible. So that's what I try to do, because I believe if that happens, if the cast likes one another, has a rapport with one another, then that will come across the screen.
I'm most grateful to you for your body of work. I wish you many, many more years of productive, creative, groundbreaking work as a true artist in the television industry. And look, I perhaps one day will have the opportunity to sit with you in studio, face to face. We can talk a little bit more about your work and what culture is on the American scene. But I thank you so much for giving us some time here today on JBS.
Thank you very much, Mark.
You be well.
Thank you.
Jim Burrows, the brilliant, iconic television director who literally helped shape American thinking. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of this edition of A Special with Jim Burrows, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.